I'm Pastor Gemma Wenger, and this is Beauty for Ashes. We have a fantastic show lined up for you today. We have Jeanne DeFazio, who wrote Creative Ways to Build Christian Community, Bob Reith, who for 30 years has led Media Fellowship International that ministers to the stars, to the celebrities. He has amazing breakfasts and dinners and meetings that I've attended, and it's just a powerful time where Christians in the industry can get together and worship the Lord. And then, of course, we have Bob Yerkes, who is one of the directors of Media Fellowship International, and he is one of the greatest stuntmen to ever live. Is that right, yeah. Mr. Yerkes? He has some incredible stories of stunts that he has done and how God has played an active role in his life. Jeanne?
Thank you so much, Gemma. You don't know how grateful I am to you, to all of you today for being here. It is a great joy for me to introduce Bob Reith and Bob Yerkes. Bob Reith was included in my book. He included 3 pages just speaking about his ministry and Mr. Grace. He was the pastoral backbone of Michael's ministry. He preached at the homeless meetings. He hosted the high-profile testimonial luncheons in New York, and he taught at the Hollywood Bible Study. It's because of Bob's encouragement, his pastoral sensitivity, his desire to bring people who are lost in the industry to God, that ministry of Mr. Grace has succeeded as it did. I'm very grateful to Bob for the years since Michael's passed, that he has met with me all around the world just to continue to encourage me in the Lord's work. And I also want to say Bob Yerkes is probably one of the most delightful human beings that walks God's earth. He is a very strong Christian, and he ministers in the industry because he's a top stuntman. Everyone loves Bob, and he reaches out with such love and such great humor in the industry. I put him in my book because his words about Bob Reith were so great when he said Bob is encouraging and he brings us to the Lord. So God bless you all for being here.
Bob, now your ministry has really grown and evolved over the years. Do you want to talk about how you met Mr. Grace and then what you've been doing for your ministry and for Hollywood and the industry?
Well, our ministry really started in Seattle, where I was a local pastor and a chaplain to professional athletes. And through that, I was invited to come to Los Angeles and to begin having meetings here. And so I'd been coming for several years before meeting Michael. I kept hearing about him, and I'd have people who came to our meetings and said, you know, you should meet Michael Grace. And I'd said, well, when it's the Lord's time, that will happen, but you know, let's let that happen naturally. And so he came to one of our events, and at the time I didn't know who he was. And so we got together and had lunch and began to talk, and probably in it was in the early 1980s, and we became very good friends, and we traveled together to different locations, and Michael became involved in sponsoring some of our events, like primarily New York City. He wanted to see the people there that he had known come to know the Lord. So he said, Bob, if you will come out and do that, I will arrange for the meetings and have Jeanne do that. But we had meetings there some years 8, 9 times a year, but some years 3 or 4 times. And so we met at Sardi's restaurant, which is one of the best restaurants, or has been, in New York. And then he would invite the people that he knew, and I would invite the people that I knew. And then together we would select a speaker who would come in. And the speakers who came were all very, very fine people. They were godly people, and a lot of them were in the public limelight. Some of them were leading politicians. But because of Michael's background and connections, they were glad to come, and they would speak for the Lord, but in his behalf. And so we did that for, I don't know, Jeanne, how many years? 10?
I'd say from the early 90s, I'd say, yeah, so at least a decade.
At least 10 years. But anyway, and then he would come to all of our meetings here, and if we had a meeting in Washington, D.C. or someplace else where he felt that he should be, he would also come and attend those. But and then in his home here in Los Angeles, we had a home Bible study also for probably 10 years.
And what was the purpose of the meetings? What did you do during these meetings?
Well, our meetings are very simple. They're usually just to begin opening and let people introduce themselves and have a time of fellowship. and then I would lead a time of Bible study, and then we'd have prayer. The ultimate goal was for people to be saved. Michael had a passion for evangelism. Everything he did, it was that these people would come to know the Lord. But once they did, we also wanted them to grow in their faith, for discipleship and in their personal life to become strong, but also professionally to live for Christ. So the theme of the meeting would be one of these different themes, but it was the underlying purpose was always evangelism.
That's fantastic. Now, I know you brought Bob Yerkes here today. He's like one of your directors as well as one of your disciples, basically.
I don't, yeah, I mean, that's all true, but really Bob is a good friend. He came to one of our first meetings here in Los Angeles, and we began to meet and to come together, and he was invited to be a member of our board. And he's been a friend and a board member since. We've traveled throughout the U.S., we've traveled in Europe, we've traveled to Israel, we've been to a lot of different places. And his heart's desire is always to serve. So it's good to have him along.
Now, you said that you started out as a chaplain, but have you known the Lord all your life? Were you born into a Christian family, or did you have an experience with the Lord?
My family, my parents were believers. Both my brother and I were adopted, and then as young adults we accepted Christ, and I felt called into the ministry during my first year as a believer. For him it was a few years later, but he also went into the ministry, and he still is serving in ministry in the Midwest. So both of us have spent our lives in following the Lord and in introducing him to other people.
What has God been doing in your ministry today? And what is it that excites you about the future that God has for you?
Well, to me, the most exciting thing about ministry ever is seeing someone accept the Lord, because that's what it's all about. Now, there are things that we do. We have Bible studies in a number of cities around the country. Over the years that we've been in existence, we've had studies in 26 different cities. And whether we have a study at any given time depends on local leaderships. I meet individually with people. I have met with senators and congressmen, and I've met with business leaders, but the focus of our ministry is entertainment people. And so I meet with writers, directors, producers, executives, in Bob's case, a stuntman, but it's really whoever the Lord brings to us and the opportunity of working. Over the years, we've seen over 3,000 people who have accepted the Lord. And so we have these people in countries all over the world. Today, we still continue to do that. Along with that, we've started a chaplains program. We'd like to begin having local leaders who are chaplains for people in the entertainment industry. And we have about 20 people now that we're working with and training, so that in the cities where they live, they'll be available to them and we can encourage and help them. This last few weeks, we've been asked if we would host a panel, and it's called FilmCom, for people of faith in filming. And so we had our first meeting in Nashville a couple of weeks ago, and we had 150 people come. And many of these are very experienced professional filmmakers, but who are believers and who want to see their product make a difference in our country. And we have been asked to sponsor that and to arrange that for next year. I really believe that will at least double by next year. And so we do that. We go to the National Prayer Breakfast in Washington, D.C. each year to join together with believers from all over the world and to spend time encouraging each other, and hopefully a time to encourage the people we bring. Because the people that we take there, we bring to that meeting for them to see examples of others and role models who are living successfully as leaders. That's one thing in entertainment that's been very, very hard. There have not been many people who have come to know the Lord who really live in a realistic way for Him in their industry. Now, there are more and more coming to that place, but that's been 30 years since we've started doing this.
Now, what issues are specific to the entertainment industry? You say that you're not seeing people in the industry living for Him. They come to you to get prayer support, strengthen their faith. What are they struggling with?
Well, I think that for one thing in entertainment, I mean, the other communities that I've lived in are all stable communities. People have 9-to-5 jobs. So they have regular schedules, they go to church, they become part of the church community. In Hollywood, that's very difficult Because first of all, most jobs are very short-term jobs here, and people are always looking for work. And so if you're an actor, director, producer, whatever, you might have a great job, but it might be for only 3 months or 6 months, and then you're looking for work. And so I think that's one of the very essential parts of this. Another is that because of that, you work for a lot of different people. And so people are always putting you in a position of needing to please others. And so many people in Hollywood are people pleasers. And so it's hard to get past that, to realize that it's the Lord in my heart who leads me. It's Him that I serve, and I need to be who I am for Him. The difficulties of travel. The business takes you all over the country, in some places all over the world. So when you're out of town a lot, you don't have the stability of being here. So being a part of our fellowship gives you a place to belong, and it gives you a place of security. I receive calls from people every week in many different places. I had a call today from a lady in Atlanta who owns a newspaper, and she'd been going through a very difficult time. And I know a lot of people in Atlanta. We've had several groups there. But she called and she was in tears, and she said, you know, please help me. I need someone that I can talk to that will understand what I'm going through, where it will be confidential, and somebody that will pray with me. So we're going to meet to talk to a few people, and hopefully by next week we'll put her in touch with someone who can be of help to her in that way to meet that need. And that happens every day from all over, so many different places. So we really are a fellowship. We're not a local organization. It operates like a church. We're a nonprofit like a local church would be, but our groups are all based on being a Christ-centered fellowship for believers.
Praise God. Now, Bob, how has Media Fellowship impacted your life?
Oh, well, I have somebody to think for me. That's good, but it's,
that's always good.
But
don't want to tire your brain.
yeah, I was brought up in a family that never mentioned God, and our dad never did. And
you mean totally atheist, or?
No, just
neither denied
they were
nor
nice
affirmed
people,
God.
but just no mention of God one way or the other. And then when I was 15, I ran away from home and joined the circus, and then
you
later
ran away
on,
from home at 15 and joined the circus.
When I was with Ringling Brothers, 57, I started reading the Bible. I thought I'd read it and list the contradictions in it, just as a project. It took me a year and 4 months to get through it, and when I finished it, I said, this couldn't have been written by a man unless it were God-inspired. So that's what I do every day. And so we played here in Hollywood, the Ringling Show, and they had a group in the entertainment business called the King's Stage, and it was actors, everything, and Jimmy Dodd from the Musketeers came and talked to my group that I had formed on the Ringling Show. So I started calling my group the King's Ring. But then I started getting involved with other ministries.
What was your group? What did you do at the circus?
Well, I was catcher in the trapeze act. I did teeter board, high wire. I used to get shot out of the cannon. Did all the acts.
Very courageous.
That's why I taught a show for many years called Circus of the Stars, where I taught all the aerial and acrobatic acts.
My goodness.
But I believe
Bob
the
was one of the premier people in trapeze in the world, and he taught others who followed him, who became premier in the industry.
I was just the catcher. They call me Butterfingers.
Yeah. He's humble.
No, I'm humble and proud of it. But my partner in the trapeze act was from here, Fairfax High School, and he did the trapeze and everything, but he doubled Cornell Wilde in the movie The Greatest Show on Earth, and for Cecil B. DeMille, and then he doubled Tony Curtis in the movie Trapeze doing the triple, and we worked together for many years, and it was just, it's been interesting to look back. This is my 67th year in show business. So,
Praise God.
Yeah.
So how do you feel that the power of God brought you through? I know that you had various accidents.
I've broken my legs 3 times, but I'm back running and everything. And first time I broke my legs was in France, and the name of the movie was Breakout.
What has been the most rewarding part of your ministry, and what is your goal for the future?
I think that the most rewarding part is seeing individuals whose lives are changed. It might be when I meet with them individually or when they come to the group or whatever, but I'll tell you, when you've done this and seen the difference between the world as it exists and the world as God exists in it, when people come to know the Lord, they are new people. And sometimes those changes are very dramatic. And I've seen people who've, been healed. I've seen people who've gotten off drugs. I've seen marriages healed. I've seen just so many things that are really miraculous. And so there isn't anything else you can compare to that. There is no amount of fame or glory or money or anything that really is going to have an impact on people like that. And so to me, the most exciting thing is seeing someone accept Christ. Now, it's rewarding to watch people grow and to see them have not only a difference in their life, but to see the difference in other people's lives. And I think the thing that saddens me the most is of seeing people who say they've made a decision for the Lord and turn back to the world and just leave that all behind. Because there are so many people who get caught up in life for whatever reason. And if I see them 3 years later or whatever, it's like God has no place in their life. Now, he may still bring them back, but at that point in time, he doesn't.
So you see a lot of compromise, a lot of backsliding, a lot of seeds that have been planted, but they don't bring forth a harvest.
This is a tough town. This is a tough, and by
Do you
say
feel
town, I
it's
don't
harder
mean
to be
Hollywood.
a Christian in Hollywood, in this town, because of the worldliness, because of the values are quite skewed in the wrong direction?
I think that it's harder in this regard, that the emphasis is so on the competition and the glory and the beauty and the success, that success drives this town. In Hollywood, it's all about glamour. In New York, it's all about the aspect of money. In Washington, D.C., it's about power. But those are the three basic temptations we have. And so when you go from one to the other, and all three cities have some of it, but each city has one that is really the strongest. And so when we see people whose lives are changed, and where they overcome that, that's what makes the difference. I mean, this is a tough career because of the instability. And the different things that happen here are not necessarily the same as others. I mean, by human nature, we all have the same temptations. But there are certain temptations that are more specific and stronger in one location than in another. So yes, entertainment is a tough profession. And I think people who come to know the Lord and have him living in them and through them, it changes their life. And if they don't, that changes their life. Because I've seen so many lives here who've been destroyed by the way they live in this town. And that saddens me.
What do you think about the morals of Hollywood, where you have to stay young, and then there's all this plastic surgery, and then this drive, you have to have the car, and it's kind of like, why are we driving around in a $250,000 car when there are starving people, in Pakistan? What are you thinking about that?
Well, I think that our moral and social values are choices we make. And if the world's impact is strong enough on a person that they need that to me shows that there is spiritually an area that's not as strong as it could be. I mean, I know a lot of very wealthy people who live very simply. Mm-hmm. But it's usually the person who doesn't have great success who's striving for those things.
Who needs that to build his or her self-confidence.
Right, for their confidence, or it's like they feel like they need that to prove to the world or to the industry that they're successful.
They're somebody.
Yeah, because then other people will want them to work for them or to be with them. And so, it doesn't matter where I've been. I've sat in the offices of the wealthy people, the homes of the wealthy, and I've sat in the places where they weren't. And by human nature, when we come to know Christ, if we are real, there is a genuineness and a humility that becomes really not only real for us, but it's something that honors God. And so those things, I really don't pay attention to them. If somebody invites me out to lunch, it doesn't matter where we go, because it's not the lunch I'm concerned about, it's them.
And their soul.
Yeah, and so, yeah, absolutely. So that's what makes the difference. Like here with Michael, his goal, Michael came from a very powerful family.
Oh, he did. Do you want to talk about his family
I just want to mention it because the Grace family was very wealthy and very powerful, and they were known all over the world. But Michael had a genuine humility. I only saw, this is a true story. I mean, I knew Michael, and I saw him in a lot of places, and a lot of times people would think that Michael slept on the street.
Right,
Because
totally.
he did not dress well.
It's true.
But the reason for that was because he had so many people who came to him who wanted something, that by him dressing and acting the way he did, it took away that whole emphasis. And so the only time I really saw him go the opposite direction was in New York City one day, and he asked me to meet him at the 21 Club for lunch. And he said, "Bob, you better wear a suit." I said, "Okay, I'll wear a suit." And so when I got there, and he was already sitting with the man that came in, when I came in, and when I sat down, he introduced me. And this man was the manager of the wealth of one of the wealthiest families in the world. And I sat at that table with them and listened to them. And Michael was sharp as a tack. He knew everything that man talked about, and whatever the conversation was, it's one of the most fascinating conversations I've ever had, because that was his element. But it was because that's where that man lived. Michael did not live that way to impress people. He lived at the level of the people he was talking to. I could tell 100 stories on Michael.
They're all things to all people, right?
They're all humorous. That's right. Being
Yeah, he
all
was
things
very
to all
funny.
people.
Mr. Grace is very funny.
But here it says Michael Grace could truly be called a character, and he was.
Wow.
Any of us who knew him, and if you grew to know him, you would grow to love him, because he had such a passionate heart for the Lord. And no matter where he went, his goal was the same thing. But anyway, he had decided to sponsor this luncheon in New York City. And I didn't realize how many of the wealthiest people in New York would attend that luncheon, because that's people he grew up with.
This was the spiritual
The
luncheon?
spiritual- oh,
the
yeah,
one
absolutely.
That he
That's
was
all
doing
about
with you.
all about them coming to know Christ, unashamedly. And that's what it was about, inviting them and getting them in. And if they would come and pay their own way, then he wanted them to do that. But if they didn't, he'd pay the way, because he wanted them to hear the gospel. And so the people, names of the people in that room, there were counts and dukes and actors and heads of companies and all this. But to Michael, it was one thing. They were his friends. He had grown up with some of them, but he knew them all, and he wanted them to know Jesus. And that was what was exciting, because that was always his motive.
That's right.
And so anyway, so he arranged these meetings. He hosted them. He never put himself up front. He would host them and have me take over the meeting and lead it. And so I just think that Michael was an amazing man, and you could be with him at Sardi's at one luncheon, and that night or the next day at McDonald's with the people from the street. But both groups were equally important to him. And so I love people like that have a concern for others and don't see them based on position, but just see them as people. And I think that, for our ministry, I meet with a lot of people who are very wealthy or who are very powerful, and I've met with heads of state. But it's not their position that makes the difference, it's their heart. And if they know Christ, they have it all. And if they don't know him, they don't.
They have nothing.
And so that's why with Bob and I, when we travel, Bob was one of the top circus performers in the world. And when I travel with him, we can go any place and people know who he is because of the work he's done. But his greatest work is the number of people that he's prayed with to accept the Lord. And he and I talk about that often, that he's had the joy of praying with hundreds of people to accept Christ by simply being there and being willing to share Christ. And that's true whether it's an actor or a stuntman or producer or director. And we're talking about the most important thing in the world. I mean, today, if you're watching television, you see the fighting in Israel.
Yes.
Which indicates we could be in the last days.
Right.
So what's more important? Heaven and hell is what it's all about. And if people come to know him, they're going to be in heaven. If they don't, they won't. So I just think it's important that what you are doing is to bring a word of encouragement, to share Christ's love, always based on the truth of the word, but with real people, so that what they're hearing is real. Because if it's real to us, it'll be real to those who listen. And if it's not real to us, it will come across as not real to other people. And so what you're doing is very, very important.
Yes, only those things we do for Christ are going to last, and we are storing up treasure in heaven where moth and rust don't corrupt and thieves don't break in and steal. And it's so important. I mean, I'm talking to you, I'm kind of like entranced. I mean, it's just the way you speak. You're very charismatic. You're very knowledgeable. You almost remind me, you have the mind of a lawyer, you know, attention to detail. And it's just so wonderful, even just being in your presence. And I know that's how the people feel who you are ministering to. Is there anything that you haven't done that you would like to do, or even in these last days, the vision that God has given you to bring even greater increase?
Well, our goal from the beginning, and this is the vision that the Lord gave us, and it's for me and then for my wife and then later for others, but it's to have fellowship groups in the main media cities of the world where people who are believers would come together, pray for one another, encourage one another, and help each other in what they're doing. And so as we see that taking place around our country and in other countries, that is that's really exciting to me to see, because their lives are changed, and through that, the opportunity of changing other people's lives. I was thrilled a couple of weeks ago in Nashville to see 150 people, all filmmakers, some of them just beginning, some very established, most of them believers. But to see this market opening up to produce and present films that are based on godly principles. We've never had that before. I've been coming here for 30 years. And when I came to Hollywood in the beginning, in fact, I had a number of people in the beginning who would say, well, I shouldn't really speak publicly about being a Christian because I wouldn't get any work. And it was true. There was no work in a rate for most people who were believers. But God has changed and is changing that. So yeah, my goal is just to see
and those movies are making money.
Yeah, that's right.
There is a market for that.
They are today, and that's one thing that's changed. Because previously, if you made a Christian film, it was distributed to churches. And they might make money, but they were low budget and they were just for the church
Acting
audience.
Wasn't so good.
Well, it was because they didn't have the money to do the right things.
Right.
You didn't have the right equipment. You couldn't afford the right people. Yeah. You did what you had. You know, you did what you could. And so today that is changing. And I mean, the film that came out this year, God Is Not Dead, it's a phenomenal film. On a low budget, produced by very good people. A number of them are people that I've worked with for years, and it's exciting to see them succeed. That's right. You know, so yeah, God is good, and it's a wonderful time to live. You know, in Scripture it tells us that when we look around and see all the problems in the world, and we see what's happening, He tells us that, you know, you could get discouraged, but these are the latter days. Look up and rejoice, because the end is near. Yes. The tougher it gets, the more excited and challenged we should be, because the closer we are to seeing Him. And that's where we are today. We are at that stage of history.
Praise God. Bob, how can people get in touch with you? How can they come to your meetings?
Well, I would suggest that they simply write to our internet address in Seattle, which is mfi@usa.net, mfi@usa.net, because that goes directly to me at the office, and we will get back in touch with them through email or by phone. We'll tell them where the meetings are in their area, or if they have a need to meet with an individual, put them in touch with an individual, and we'll do everything that we can to encourage and meet their need.